Captain Michael Turner's life looked perfect from the outside, and in many ways it was. He wore his crisp navy blue pilot uniform like armor, polished shoes gleaming, as he walked through airports with quiet authority. Passengers often stopped to thank him, flight attendants admired his calm confidence, and colleagues respected his spotless record. At 42 years old, Michael was living a life most could only dream of. He had a charming home in Chicago, a devoted wife named Claire, and 2 children who thought the world of their father. To his neighbors, he was the man who shoveled snow from their driveways in winter and organized barbecues in summer. To his family, he was the steady provider who always came home from long trips with stories of faraway places. Yet beneath the image of perfection, a storm was gathering, hidden from everyone who trusted him. It began on one of his routine flights to Toronto. For Michael, the route was familiar, the skyline of the Canadian city a backdrop he had grown used to over the years. On one particular layover, he wandered into a real estate open house while exploring the city. There he met Elise, a young real estate agent with sharp intelligence and striking charm. She was confident, quick with a smile, and carried herself with a sense of independence that immediately drew him in. Their conversation was light at first, just polite remarks exchanged about the neighborhood, but something lingered between them. Elise saw Michael as worldly, mysterious, and well-spoken, while he saw her as the escape he had never allowed himself to imagine. What started as occasional dinners turned into something far more serious. Whenever Michael had a layover in Toronto, he would find a way to see Elise. They spent evenings in quiet restaurants, long drives outside the city, and nights in hotels where no one knew his name. Elise believed he was single, a man dedicated to his demanding job but searching for something more. Michael, terrified of losing her, carefully constructed a web of lies. He avoided talking about his home life, always changing the subject when the conversation drifted toward the future. To Elise, he seemed private but sincere, and she accepted his excuses because she wanted to believe in him. As months turned into years, Michael learned to balance his double life with astonishing skill. He would attend his daughter's school recitals one evening, then fly across the border and spend the next evening holding Elise's hand at a Toronto cafe. He learned which lies worked best, which explanations raised the fewest questions, and how to erase small details that might give him away. When Claire asked why he seemed distracted, he blamed it on the stress of work. When Elise wondered why he always left so quickly, he claimed it was the rigid schedule of an international pilot. Both women trusted him, and both remained unaware that they were sharing the same man. The thrill of secrecy gave Michael an energy he had never felt before. Each time he crossed customs, it felt like stepping into another version of himself. In Chicago, he was the dependable father and husband. In Toronto, he was free, spontaneous, and unburdened by responsibility. It was dangerous, but the danger itself became part of the attraction. For a while, it seemed that he had mastered the art of deception. But beneath his careful planning, small cracks began to appear. Elise noticed how he never allowed photographs of them together. She wondered why he never stayed the entire weekend, why he was always rushing back. Claire, too, began to sense distance in their marriage, though she chalked it up to the demanding nature of his career. Michael dismissed these suspicions, convincing himself that he could manage both worlds forever. Yet the truth about secret lives is that they rarely stay hidden. Michael was playing with fire, and deep down he knew it. Each time he boarded a plane, carrying not only passengers, but also the weight of his lies, the tension inside him grew heavier. Elise's affection was becoming more demanding, her love more insistent on a future together. His family responsibilities were growing as well, with children who needed him present, and a wife who trusted him completely. Every day, the line between his two identities blurred a little more, until even he could no longer tell which version of himself was real. It was in those early days, when Michael first began his affair, that the seeds of a tragedy were planted. What seemed like harmless secrecy was becoming the foundation of something far darker. He believed he was in control, but the truth was that he was walking a path that would eventually spiral beyond his ability to manage. His uniform, once a symbol of respect and trust, was becoming a mask that hid the dangerous lies beneath. And though no one around him could see it yet, the life of Captain Michael Turner was already unraveling, piece by piece, with every flight he took to Toronto. For nearly 2 years, Michael managed to maintain the illusion that his two lives could coexist without colliding. He had perfected the routine at home in Chicago. He was the doting husband and father, never missing holidays or family traditions, and in Toronto, he became a man who lived entirely for Elise. The distance between the two cities gave him the cover he needed, and his career as an airline pilot provided the perfect excuse for constant travel. To those around him, his life seemed nothing but ordinary, filled with the responsibilities of work and family. But inside, Michael was living a dangerous balancing act that required constant lies, rehearsed stories, and the ability to switch identities as easily as changing uniforms. At first, Elise was too in love to question the inconsistencies. She believed Michael when he told her his schedule was unpredictable, and that his work left him with little time for anything else. Their weekends together felt like stolen treasures, moments away from the world where nothing else mattered but the two of them. Elise dreamed about a future with him, imagining the day he would finally have the freedom to settle down. Her friends noticed how deeply she had fallen for him, and though some expressed quiet concerns about his secrecy, she defended him passionately. To her, Michael was the man who listened to her fears, encouraged her ambitions, and made her feel truly seen. But little by little, Elise began noticing details that did not add up. He never spoke of his family, not even in passing. Whenever she suggested taking a photo together, he declined, saying he disliked cameras. He rarely spent more than 2 nights in a row with her, always rushing back with vague excuses about last-minute flights. When she asked to meet his friends or colleagues, he avoided the subject entirely. These omissions began to fester in her mind, small doubts that gnawed at her trust. The turning point came when she accidentally discovered a receipt in his bag for children's toys. It was dated from a weekend he claimed to have been working overseas. Elise tried to ignore the unease, but her instincts told her something was wrong. Slowly, she started digging for the truth. She searched his name online, scoured social media, and pieced together fragments of information he had let slip over time. She traced his flight schedules, noting how often his supposed layovers conveniently lined up with weekends and holidays. What she uncovered shocked her. Michael was not the unattached man he pretended to be. He was married, with a wife and children, living a life in Chicago that Elise had never been a part of. The betrayal cut deeply, not only because he had lied, but because she had built her future around him. Everything she thought she knew about him was false. The discovery changed everything. Elise's love quickly curdled into resentment, and her once hopeful vision of their life together turned into a storm of anger and grief. She began keeping records of everything, receipts, emails, even his flight logs. It was as if she was preparing for a confrontation she knew was inevitable. Her friends noticed a shift in her behavior. She became restless, often distracted, and spoke less of her dreams with Michael. Instead, she seemed consumed with proving the truth of what she had uncovered. Meanwhile, Michael sensed the growing tension, but chose to believe he could control it. He had built his life on compartmentalization, on keeping everything in its place. To him, Elise's suspicions were manageable, just another problem to explain away. He underestimated how deeply wounded she felt, and how determined she was to expose his lies. For Michael, the stakes were monumental. If Elise revealed the truth, his career could crumble, his marriage would collapse, and the pristine image he had spent years cultivating would be destroyed. Despite the danger, he continued the affair, convincing himself that he could talk Elise back into compliance. He believed that his charm, his calm authority, and his practiced explanations would be enough to keep her quiet. But Elise was no longer the trusting woman he had first met. Every time she looked at him, she saw the lies, and every moment they spent together was charged with unspoken tension. The careful balance Michael had maintained for years was beginning to fall apart. What had once felt thrilling and liberating now became suffocating. He could feel the walls closing in around him, but he clung to the illusion that he was still in control. Elise, however, had reached a breaking point. She was no longer willing to live in the shadows of his deceit. The stage was set for a collision between truth, love and lies, love and betrayal. That would end in disaster neither of them could escape. The confrontation between Michael and Elise came suddenly, but in truth it had been building for months. Elise had prepared for it carefully, gathering every piece of evidence she could find that proved the life he had hidden from her. She had the printed marriage record, receipts that showed his connection to Chicago, and notes about his flight schedules. For nights she sat in her apartment, imagining how she would confront him, rehearsing the words she would say, and the fury she would unleash. By the time Michael arrived for what he assumed would be another ordinary visit, she was ready. Her apartment was quiet, but on the table sat the pile of evidence that represented the unraveling of his lies. Michael walked through the door with his usual calmness, still in uniform from his recent flight, and at first he tried to mask his surprise. He saw the papers laid out before him, and understood instantly that the charade was over. Elise's eyes were filled not with the warmth he had grown used to but with a cold determination. She demanded answers, no longer willing to accept the vague stories he had fed her in the past. For the first time in their relationship, she had power over him, and she pressed relentlessly for the truth. Michael tried to explain, tried to soften his words, but every sentence only made him sound more guilty. Elise listened, but her fury grew with each excuse. She told him she was going to expose him, to his wife, to his airline, to anyone who needed to know. She no longer cared about protecting his reputation or his career. In her mind, he had destroyed her trust, stolen years of her life, and humiliated her with his lies. The man she had loved was not real, and the betrayal was too large to forgive. Michael, however, could not allow her threat to become reality. His entire life was built on control, on maintaining the flawless image of the dependable pilot, the devoted husband, the admired father. If Elise followed through on her threat, everything would collapse. Fear began to course through him, mingling with anger, until reason gave way to desperation. The argument escalated, voices rising in the quiet of the night. Neighbors later reported hearing a loud thud, followed by silence. Inside the apartment, the confrontation reached its tragic breaking point. Overcome with rage and panic, Michael lashed out violently. Elise, caught off guard, tried to resist, but she had no chance against his sudden force. In those moments, Michael's double life came crashing down, and the mask of calm professionalism he wore so easily was shattered. The man who guided planes across skies with steady hands was suddenly reckless, consumed by the need to silence the one person who threatened to reveal his secret. When the struggle ended, Elise lay motionless, and the reality of what Michael had done began to sink in. He stared at her, realizing that in a single night he had crossed a line he could never retreat from. Panic overtook him. He paced the apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of how to cover his crime, how to erase the evidence of his betrayal and violence. He knew the police would investigate, and he knew his name would surface quickly if her disappearance raised suspicion. In his panic, he attempted to clean the scene, gathering what he could and destroying anything that might directly link him. Yet the traces of violence could not be fully erased, no matter how hard he tried. By dawn, Michael was back in uniform, boarding his scheduled return flight to Chicago. To the passengers, he looked like the same confident pilot they trusted with their lives, his voice calm as he guided them across the skies. No one on that plane knew that just hours before, He had left a woman dead in her own apartment. He maintained his composure, compartmentalizing the horror of the night before, convincing himself that if he acted normal, no one would ever suspect him. Elise's absence was noticed almost immediately. She failed to appear at work, missed appointments, and ignored calls from friends who quickly grew alarmed. Within days, the police were contacted, and the missing persons investigation began. The neatly organized life Michael had always managed was now under a scrutiny he could not avoid. Elise's friends mentioned his name to investigators, explaining that she had been seeing a pilot who often traveled between Chicago and Toronto. What had been hidden for so long was now coming into the light. Michael believed he could outfly suspicion, that his uniform and professional reputation would shield him. But already, the first threads of his story were unraveling. Evidence he thought he had destroyed would soon resurface, and the web of lies that had sustained his double life was beginning to collapse. His attempt to maintain control through violence had only set in motion a chain of events that would ensure his downfall. The calm, composed pilot had turned into a desperate man, trying to cover a crime that could never be concealed. The investigation into Elise's disappearance began swiftly, because her friends and colleagues knew she was not the type to simply vanish. She had a reputation for reliability, always answering her phone, always keeping appointments, and never going more than a few hours without updating someone about her schedule. When she missed a meeting with an important client and failed to return repeated calls, alarm spread quickly. Police were contacted, and within hours, detectives were combing through her Toronto apartment. What they found confirmed that something was wrong. Elise's purse, wallet, and keys were still inside, her phone charger plugged in near her bed, and groceries she had purchased remained untouched on the counter. Nothing about the scene suggested she had planned to leave on her own. What did stand out were faint signs of struggle: a lamp knocked over, a faint stain near the carpet, and furniture slightly out of place. Investigators began piecing together her last known movements. Her phone records showed she had been in contact with one man repeatedly, a man she referred to often in her messages to friends. His name was Michael Turner. At first glance, he seemed an unlikely suspect. He was a respected airline pilot, a man with no criminal history, no signs of financial trouble, and a reputation for being calm and dependable. But the closer detectives looked, the stranger his presence became. Elise's friends confirmed that Michael often visited her on weekends, though none had ever met him directly. He was careful to avoid being seen, careful not to leave any traces. The secrecy raised suspicion, and detectives made him their central focus. Their suspicions grew stronger when surveillance footage was reviewed. A camera at the entrance of Elise's building captured Michael arriving the night she disappeared. Hours later, he was seen leaving with a baseball cap pulled low over his face, moving quickly, with what appeared to be scratches on his hands. He had not reported anything unusual, had not checked in with authorities about Elise's disappearance, and seemed to be going about his work as if nothing had happened. Investigators contacted the airline, confirming his flight schedule matched the timeline. He had left Toronto early the following morning on a scheduled flight to Chicago. While Michael projected calm, his actions began betraying him. Detectives discovered he had purchased cleaning supplies late that night, at a store not far from Elise's apartment. The payment had been made in cash, but the receipt was found discarded in a trash bin nearby. Combined with the signs of a struggle in her home, the evidence painted a disturbing picture. To strengthen their case, investigators dug deeper into Michael's life. What they uncovered shocked them. He was married, with 2 children, living a seemingly happy family life in Chicago. Elise had not known about his wife, and the secrecy that had once seemed mysterious was revealed as deliberate deception. The affair, investigators concluded, had been on the verge of exposure, and Elise's threat to reveal his lies gave Michael a motive strong enough to kill. The breakthrough came when Elise's body was discovered in a wooded area just outside Toronto. A hiker came across the shallow grave, and forensic examination confirmed her identity. Bruising and marks on her body pointed to a violent struggle. The discovery eliminated any remaining doubt. Michael was not simply a person of interest. He was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. Detectives moved quickly. They coordinated with American authorities, preparing to arrest Michael as soon as he landed from his next scheduled flight. When he stepped off the plane in Chicago, uniform pressed and posture confident, he was met not with admiring passengers, but with law enforcement waiting at the gate. He was taken into custody without incident, maintaining a composed expression even as cameras captured the shocking fall of a man once respected in the skies. The evidence against him mounted in the weeks that followed. Forensic testing linked traces of Elise's blood to fibers found on his uniform. His phone records placed him near the wooded area where her body was discovered. Witnesses recalled seeing him in stores late at night, buying supplies he could not explain. The scratches on his hands, caught on camera, matched defensive wounds consistent with Elise's struggle. Every detail tied him closer to the crime, unraveling the carefully constructed double life he had hidden for years. Public reaction was immediate and intense. News of the case spread rapidly, fueled by the shocking contrast between his polished image and the crime he was accused of committing. Passengers who had flown with him were horrified, unable to reconcile the reassuring voice from the cockpit with the reality of his actions. Colleagues at the airline were stunned, many refusing to believe the man they had admired could be capable of such violence. Yet the evidence left little room for doubt. As the case against him solidified, Michael remained outwardly calm, insisting on his innocence during questioning. He claimed Elise was alive when he left her, and that her death must have occurred afterward. But investigators knew better. The timeline, the evidence, and his own behavior contradicted every denial. What had once been a life built on precision and control had crumbled into chaos, and the image of the dependable pilot was gone forever. The net had closed tightly around him, leaving no escape. Michael Turner's arrest stunned both countries. The news spread like wildfire, not only because he was accused of murder but because of who he was, a respected airline pilot, a man entrusted with hundreds of lives every week, now stood accused of ending one in cold blood. Newspapers ran his photograph in uniform alongside grim headlines about betrayal and violence. Television anchors replayed the footage of him being led away in handcuffs, his face stoic, his shoulders squared as if he could still command authority. For many, the contrast was almost impossible to comprehend. How could the calm, reassuring voice from the cockpit belong to the same man accused of killing a woman he claimed to love? The trial became a media spectacle. Prosecutors built their case carefully, presenting every piece of evidence to the jury in a way that dismantled Michael's carefully constructed image. They showed the surveillance footage of him entering and leaving Elise's building, the scratches visible on his hands. They detailed his late-night purchase of cleaning supplies, the forensic evidence linking fibers from his uniform to Elise's blood, and the shallow grave discovered outside Toronto. Every fact chipped away at the illusion of his innocence. They painted him as a man so desperate to protect his reputation and family that he resorted to the most final solution imaginable. His calm demeanor, they argued, was not a sign of innocence, but the mark of someone who had spent years living a double life. The defense worked tirelessly to present another story. They argued the crime was not premeditated, that it had been an act of passion, a sudden eruption during a heated argument. They emphasized his career, his lack of prior violence, and his responsibilities as a father. Their goal was to humanize him, to portray him as a man who made a terrible mistake under unbearable pressure, rather than a calculated killer. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The jury could not overlook the lies he had told, the deliberate efforts to hide his double life, and the clear steps he took after Elise's death to conceal what he had done. As the proceedings dragged on, His wife Claire attended quietly, her expression unreadable. She had once believed her husband was loyal and devoted, but the trial revealed truths that shattered her world. She learned of the affair, the years of deception, and the lengths he went to preserve the false image of their marriage. Sitting in the courtroom, she was forced to watch as strangers dissected the man she thought she knew, exposing him piece by piece until nothing was left but the outline of a liar and a murderer. For her, the betrayal was twofold. Not only had he destroyed another woman's life, but he had also destroyed hers. The jury deliberated for only a short time before reaching a verdict: guilty of murder. The words echoed through the courtroom, sealing Michael's fate. The judge's sentence was delivered with firm finality, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. There would be no more flights, no more carefully balanced lies, no more pretending to be the man everyone admired. The mask had been ripped away, leaving only the truth of who he was and what he had done. The aftermath was devastating. His airline immediately cut ties, removing his name and photograph from all internal records, as though erasing him could repair the damage his actions had caused. Colleagues spoke in hushed tones about how none of them had ever suspected a thing. Passengers who had once trusted him with their safety were horrified, unable to reconcile their memories with the reality of his crime. Claire retreated from public view, left to rebuild her life in the shadow of his disgrace. Their children, too young to fully understand, would one day learn the truth about the father who betrayed them. For the public, the case became a chilling reminder of how easily appearances can deceive. Michael Turner had been a man trusted by thousands, admired by neighbors, and loved by his family. Yet behind that perfect exterior lived a secret that ended in violence and tragedy. His downfall was not only the result of one terrible night, but the culmination of years of lies, selfish choices, and the belief that he could live without consequence. In prison, Michael became just another inmate, stripped of the uniform and authority that once set him apart. The man who once soared above the clouds was now confined to a cell, his life reduced to routine and regret. His story circulated on true crime shows and documentaries, each retelling focusing on the shocking transformation of a respected pilot into a convicted murderer. It was a story that fascinated and horrified in equal measure, a tale of ambition, deception, and the devastating cost of secrets. What began as a hidden affair had spiraled into betrayal, violence, and ruin. In the end, Michael's desperate attempt to preserve his image had destroyed everything he had sought to protect. His career, his marriage, his freedom, and his very identity. The case became a lasting warning about the dangers of double lives and the destructive power of lies. Michael Turner's name, once associated with professionalism and trust, would forever be remembered for the crime that ended his double life, and the woman who paid the ultimate price for his deception.